All right, welcome back to the Unsubscribed Tribe. My name is Janet, also known as Rocky's Adventure over on the gram. I'm here back again with my good friend Ben Lee. Ben, how are you doing?
Hey, pretty good, pretty good. Things are getting warmer here. Our quote unquote stay at home order is being lifted. What does that mean? I don't know, but it's being lifted. So I'll take it.
Love it, love it. Yeah, and I'm over in BC. It's been beautiful weather here. We went back to in-person dining, but we actually also had a huge discovery here in the last week. So we're going to talk about that today, and that is 215 bodies of residential school children were found using radar up in Kamloops. So Kamloops is about an hour and a half from where I am here in Armstrong, British Columbia. And so we thought we'd use this as an opportunity to talk about health issues and sociocultural perspectives of kinesiology. I think that's the course that I took. Ben, you took a similar course in university, right?
Yeah, really similar. I get the feeling every single university's kin or phys ed program has a course like this. It's funny because usually people usually the kids don't really appreciate it, but I think as you get older, and you start developing your own opinion about things, then it becomes like a really cool course. I took a course like this actually recently in through like a weird twist of events we won't really get into, but long story short, I was sitting in this class at U of T being taught on the subject, and it was it was super interesting, to learn about how different ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations are portrayed in physical culture. Because I think when you think about it, it's like the reason, especially in physical culture, like we talk about this constantly on the show about how women are portrayed in fitness, things of that nature. There's like a really like you can really dig deep into why all this stuff happens. And you think about who are like the quote unquote grandfathers of modern physical culture, and it all stems from that. Like, well, who do you got? I think in here in North America, you could probably credit like Joe Weider, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Steve Reeves, to the popularity of fitness and working out, all that stuff. Because I mean, like Steve Reeves started in the '60s, Arnold and Joe Weider in the late '60s, I believe. Arnold, of course, that pumping the movie Pumping Iron. We've all seen that movie. I think like the pump to me is like coming, like I'm coming day and night. Uh,
I have not seen that. We know that I don't watch movies. Like you're the television reference point. I'm like, we'll add it to my list to watch.
oh, like Pumping Iron. Like it's a really good like cult, like in terms of like fitness culture. I think it's like a really awesome movie because keep in mind, like when this came out, like current bro culture like didn't exist. So, and this is like if you really want to
And then
really
came Gymshark.
Gymshark, I mean, you could really argue Gymshark was the evolution of the pumping iron culture. Just fast forward 50 years or 40 years or whatever. But it's a really it's an awesome historical movie, especially now understanding where we are and going back to watch it.
Mhm.
Because there's a reason that here in North America that people are so concerned about having a six pack and looking like beach ready, Jersey Shore kind of stuff, and all has to do with all that kind of stuff. With the Arnold movie, with Pumping Iron, and like the bodybuilders and like the pursuit of building a physique. And I still remember as well. Um, I may be crossing my wires. I'm just telling the story secondhand, but apparently, well, like the current like bodybuilding magazines like Flex and Muscular Development,
Yeah.
and all these and I mean Flex is the big one that Joe Weider runs, and Joe Weider has this empire built on like bodybuilding. Like I think they sponsor the Mr. Olympia. They have their own supplement line, blah 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 kind of thing. But Joe got to start in the '60s publishing magazines. And apparently, the way the story goes was that there were two magazines that competed with one another. Joe's was focused more on physique and aesthetic. And apparently, and this is where it gets a little hazy, it was used as like a surrogate, like gay porn magazine in the 60s. Because it's just, young, good looking guys wearing very little, showing off their bodies, right? And this is stuff that Joe was into. And there was another magazine, I forget the name of it, that was more performance oriented. So they covered more Olympic weightlifting, which, during the 60s and Cold War was a big deal, right? But some way or another, the two came to a head. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, Joe's magazine won out. And as a result, like this is all you saw in like in print media when it came to magazines about like working out fitness, because they were just glorifying this idea of, like the ideal body and ideal physique. Um, Interestingly enough, something I learned in this class I took, and I mean, like, I don't really have a side on this. I'm just kind of reporting like what I learned. But apparently, according to these textbooks, measuring the body, like being able to benchmark the body and achieve optimal and optimizing performance, comes from fascist origins. That apparently, like, the Nazis were really big on this kind of thing, because their big thing was about genetic superiority, right? Like
You're
why
not
the
wrong. Yeah, I don't think you're wrong on that. I'm like, this makes so much sense.
yeah, like why the Aryans, why the Aryans are the superior of, like the commoner. And it's funny because Hitler was basically a spitting image of what he hated, right? Like a short, unathletic guy with brown hair. And like the Aryan Superman were supposed to be these tall, long blondes, flowing hair with these Greek god bodies. And like Hitler looks the opposite of that. So I was wondering what was going on with that. Is but yeah, like they were very big on, like, it was, I think that's where, if I'm not mistaken, anthropometry got started from, like, which evolved nowadays into ergonomics. And when they design anything from like car seats to office furniture or whatever, you have to consider what are the average limb proportions of the human being, so you can fit the person to what they're using.
Okay, so recently I started to look stuff up about this, and I meant to send this to you to have a chat with you before we had this conversation on air. But I found a study regarding different spinal sections for Asian populations versus Euro populations, where their thoracic spine and their lumbar spine are actually different numbers of vertebrae, which I'm relating to the fact that I drive a Honda and I have a really hard time sitting in the Honda. And I've always just assumed it's just not made for my body type. Whereas I jump in an SUV, you can be in a Suburban. I mean, it's made for the average American, which is how many pounds? Like, I mean, like I'm assuming that they must take a Suburban, they must figure out, okay, who is the person that's going to be driving this, average out their body type. And my dad is, 6'5" and about 200 pounds now. I think he was 250 pounds, at one point. So those were the vehicles that he's comfortable in, but it's based on like the genetic differences. Going back to what you were saying about the magazines and the show, that was one thing that I have eliminated from my life. Was like magazines, first of all, was a huge one. Seeing all those bodies and knowing that they were just how the effort that goes into these photo shoots and stuff. And I think, going back to what you said, it's very just like white, like Oxygen magazine is just lots of white chicks in bikinis, and it's not an accurate representation of the population or how the population looks like. And even talking about Hitler and being able to benchmark the bodies, I mean, we see that different bodies have different strengths. And people like Sarah Robles, like, she has become a huge mentor for me because she's so strong. She is not an Oxygen fitness model, but man, she works her butt off, she accomplishes her goals, she's going to her third Olympics. That's really awesome. So going back to how this relates to race, just I just piped up with the study that I found about Asian populations. Is this something that you've come across in your studies based on like spine and biomechanics?
Not so much about the spine specifically, but there's a whole field of study out there known as forensic anthropometry. Wait, what's the one where, like, when they research like old civilizations? Um,
Yeah, anthropology. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
went on a date with a
anthropology. And
guy that had a degree, I think a PhD in that. Really boring. Only had like one good story about picking up bodies out of the new terminal from the Toronto airport. do not recommend. 0 to 10, do not recommend
All
dating.
right, yeah. Anthropometry is the measurement of the human body. Anthropology is the study of past humans. Okay, yeah. So forensic anthropology is the field, and it's basically looking at differences, or is it, or whatever. Sorry, it's looking at differences in human anatomy based on like ethnic and cultural backgrounds,
Okay.
or more so ethnic background, I suppose. And this is one reason that, like, I mean, it's hypothesized anyways, that this is one reason that Eastern Europe and China dominates at Olympic weightlifting, and why more Nordic countries and Northern European countries dominate at more Highland Games type of events and
Mm-hmm.
strongman based events.
We like
And
throwing trees.
yeah, well, it's according to, well, this was Stu McGill who told me this, and I think this is based on a lot of research that he's read from in this other field, because that's the thing is that throughout his career and as a biomechanist, sometimes you're brought in with court cases.
Okay.
And like in the case of like a murder or something, they say, oh, okay, well, this person, they're showing signs of this kind of trauma, this injury to the low back, and they'll bring in a guy like Stu to be like, okay, well, yeah, the story makes sense based on the biomechanics of how he felt or the impact he took, or no, it doesn't make sense, something fishy going on here because the science says you should not have this kind of injury pattern with this kind of load pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But he, like, in cases where you can't identify the body because it's charred or it's chopped up or whatever, they bring in a forensic anthropologist to look at whatever remains are there and try to piece together, okay, is this like a male or female, are they black, white, Latino, blah 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 kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Stu kind of saw, like, or one of the trends that emerged was they found that east on average anyways, so you're always going to get deviations about the mean, but on average Eastern Europeans and Chinese have shallower hip sockets.
Right. Yeah.
And this is what allows that femoral head to rotate and allow them to achieve super deep squat depth. Um, and it's when you look at a sport that requires deep hip and knee flexion, like Olympic weightlifting, their bodies are able to naturally accommodate these postures. So there's less work being done, greater mechanical efficiency. So there's greater, performance. Whereas if you get someone, who has, let's say, deep hip sockets, so as that femoral head rotates, the actual femur itself butts up against the socket. Then now you're physically blocked in restriction. And this is where you'll see, like a lot of people when you actually test their squats, their back starts rounding before they even hit parallel. And in some of these cases, it's kind of like, that sucks, but like, this is what God gave you. This is what you were born with.
Wow.
And so, like Stu was saying, that he himself was one of those. Like, he is of Celtic origin, like McGill. And so, yeah, historically, throughout his days, he's always been a pretty bad squatter. And part of it was that he could never get comfortable. He could never achieve good depth, like while maintaining ideal stability.
Mm.
But then if you look at sports that require short range hip power, like caber tossing, because like more so Northern Europeans have a limited range of motion they can move about, they can produce high force, a high rate of force through that limited range. So you get stuff like the weight over bar event, the caber toss, stone carrying. This is where they shine.
Wow. That's so awesome. It reminds me of just talking about the evolution and genetics. I read about a tribe that has an enlarged spleen, and so they are able to stay underwater for, I think, 13 minutes was the number, because they have evolved to meet the demands of their environment, and they are a fishing community. So they do this fishing underwater, and they have had this genetic mutation happen. I mean, talk about like Marvel. But I think about how things can go the opposite way. So the residential schools situation, I see that as a significant trauma that would have impacted the health of future generations in so many ways. I mean, I was reading about how they were actually doing experiments on these kids and were feeding them, they were malnourishing them to see the effects on the kids. And one of the things that they fed the children was powdered milk. So like think about impact that these, malnourished children would have been grown up in this trauma and then continues on for generations. And unfortunately, we see the indigenous population really struggling to overcome the legacy of a lot of these issues. And I think that, like, that's where you see the educated fitness community really starting to understand the connection between trauma and health. Krista Scott Dickinson from Precision Nutrition recently published an amazing article about this and about how coaches are, fitness coaches and health coaches, you're really actually going to be dealing with a lot of deeper issues and legacy issues there.
Yeah, it's man, like you talk about like a group of people who've been really screwed. And indigenous people are pretty much at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's absolutely wild. The amount of like bullshit like they had to put up with, and like it's pretty wild because you think about it as like this other group comes in and says like, oh, like what we do is right, what everyone else does is wrong, and we're going to force our beliefs upon you. Like that's like a genocide in itself. Like,
Mm.
and like experimenting on the natives or indigenous people, that has like what's his name, the Nazi doctor fellow, the Slayer song, um,
I don't
Angel
know.
of Death, the Angel of Death, Joseph. His name is escaping me, but whatever. He was like the doctor at Auschwitz concentration camp, and he was known for doing just in pure like insane human experimentation, like how much heat can the human body survive, how much cold can the human body survive,
Wow.
can and like if can you grow another limb or head on your body, can your circulatory system support that. So we did a lot of really ghastly stuff, and the most insane part is I'm pretty sure he got off like scot-free because when the Allies took over, they basically took his research and cataloged it, and and from what I understand, like hired like all their scientists to come work for the US, like scientific programs, like anything from medical all the way to like rocket science. So
Wow.
it's
That's
it's crazy. But yeah, but I didn't talk about indigenous people and just like the history of getting fucked like by the settlers. And it's like, we talk about genetic like differences. Well, like what's that saying that like indigenous people were never, had the type of alcohol that like the settlers brought with them, and like it somehow like it just created like massive like addiction and like tolerance problems. And this is like a legacy problem. This is why there's the rates of alcoholism are insanely high in like in places with a lot of indigenous people. And it's just that like just generationally they got really screwed with alcoholism and addiction. And of course like you bring that back to the trauma. Like, you ever seen the movie or read the book Indian Horse by Richard, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, Richard Waganese, I believe.
no, I have not.
Really, really, really interesting. Both a book and movie. I ended up seeing, reading the book and seeing the movie in that class I took, and it talks about like the experience of it's basically like the narration of this like elderly native man who kind of recounts his life, and about how like his parents were educated in residential schools, and how his mother was trying to convert them to become Catholic,
Hmm.
and because they claimed that worshiping like their gods was made them heathens, blah blah blah. And then I think like both of his parents succumbed to alcoholism, so he was raised by his grandmother, um, in like like living out in the land, and eventually like they got caught by like white people. I'm not sure what happened. He got separated from his grandmother, ended up like living in a residential school, and it kind of talked about how like he used hockey as his escape,
Mm.
like from all the bullshit, and got to the point where like he became like a really good hockey player. And it kind of talks about like like as like the school traveled to play other teams, they're constant, it's the amount of racism and the stuff being thrown at them and being said to them is just like like really really rampant. And it follows him all the way up to like being in the NHL, where like they still call him like the chief or whatever, and
Hmm.
everyone does like in the native chants, Adam and all that kind of stuff. And then it's later on revealed that the entire time he was growing up, he was actually being sexually abused by the priest, or like who was also the hockey coach.
Yeah, that is a
So
lot. That's a lot of that's coming out. It's very interesting because like the Catholic Church is big on the priests, not doing anything, but it's coming out, I guess, that their repressed sexuality actually drives them to target, victims that, like, you talk about like guilt and shame. And we've talked about this over the last year as I've gone through like just a very deep, thorough deconversion when I was growing up, or I was raised homeschooled and Christian. So I was definitely a part of that line of thinking. And I, left the faith, let's say, or stopped believing, but I never really examined all of the programming and the beliefs that it had put in me intrinsically, and as I've continued to study health science and, do things like meditation, that's one where I'm like, the Bible is so wrong on stuff, because meditation is a place of non-judgmentally observing your thoughts. That's what it is. It has scientific validity like behind it in terms of the benefits for your body, for your mind, alleviating stress and depression. Then you've got your Christian faith over here that says God is judging you all the time. And so you cannot simultaneously not judge your thoughts while being a Christian, is how I feel that it is. And so I've had to undo all this. And it's funny, my girlfriend, I remember we grew up together. Our parents were both, our mothers were both friends, Christians, doing Bible study and stuff together. She said, I feel like somebody's watching me all the time. And I used to feel like that too. Like, it just feels like you're constantly being judged, and you're born bad. And so I started taking this position of compassionate, like being compassionate and saying, your body has like wisdom in it, and you're trying to do the best that you can. You perhaps have poor coping mechanisms in front of you. You look at alcohol, like the spiritual practices and the healing powers of a lot of the just ceremonial processes like drumming in powwows and singing and those kinds of things all have a very similar physiological effect as they do in church. I mean, you're stimulating your vagal nerve when you are singing. When you're hitting a drum, you're getting a rhythmic beat. It helps to release anxiety. You're hitting something, it's getting energy out of your body. So these practices have a physiological benefit. And then you bring in church, which also has similar practices, which are, singing and praying, gratitude, giving thanks. It's amazing to read about the hunting practices and culture of indigenous people
mhm.
and how they really show gratitude for these animals. But then I look at Western culture, and we brought in these factory farms with these animals that are full of toxins that are making everybody sick. They're living a terrible
Yeah.
life. You got your indigenous culture, wild grass fed meat, high omega 3s, so good for your health. And yet in Canada, we're still fighting about hunting rights and fishing rights for indigenous people. Meanwhile, we're poisoning everybody with our colonialist bullshit.
Yeah, it's this is it really speaks to a testament, as to the what's the term, the unsustainability of the way we're eating. Because, like, I mean, being like hunter gatherer, or just having wild meats is health wise, I mean, like, ideal, but from like a logistical standpoint, very difficult to feed 300 million people in the US, for example, or 30 million people here in Canada. So you bring in the factory farming, but then this raises, and there's always this trade-off of like quality and efficiency. Like, the two will never exist, always on the opposite ends of the spectrum here. So when you have a population density like of what's here in Ontario, you're going to feed all these people, not to mention with good old capitalism and low income, and low income individuals who can't afford a high quality food. So you end up with this overly processed like assembly line food that it has like negative nutritional value, but just so cheap to produce. And it's just that people need, macronutrients. So they just put together in some weird paste, and it's like, here you go. It's like costs 99 cents a pound, and and everyone can eat it. So I feel like the way everything is set up, it's just more so about survival, but not optimization.
Thriving. Yeah. Well, and the sad thing is that we're depleting the earth of resources, and we're continuing to destroy the resources at the same time as just, I think, making this trauma go on like extensively longer for indigenous people because they're not getting the support that they need. I mean, we don't have clean drinking water for you know, um, every reserve in Canada. And meanwhile, in the last year, everybody about COVID has really gotten excited about human rights. Well, I'm really glad that everyone's going to be a part of this conversation, because get in line. Running water, I think, is number one. I mean, not, and like at the same time, I think of like the fluoride that comes out of my tap, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's the perfect situation, but you definitely have to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's better than not having water to drink at all. So, you take what you can get in baby steps. But like going back to the Catholic thing, it actually reminded me there's an old Family Guy episode back when it was still good. So like this like season two, when Peter's dad visits, and his dad's like this like cranky old Irish man who's like ultra Catholic, and he's trying to tell Chris that like using the bathroom is a sin. So like the entire time he's there, like Chris is just like has to use the bathroom so badly, but his grandfather keeps stopping him. And finally at the end, like Lois tells Peter to like grow a spine and like stand up to his dad. And finally Lois tells Peter, Lois tells Chris, like, Chris, it's okay to use the bathroom. And he's like, I gotta go. He just like runs like out of the room. But yeah, but like that's the thing. Like people just follow that like to the letter to the T. And you talk about it as well, like what constitutes someone who's like a good Christian or Catholic. You look at like rates of like alcoholism and abuse, like within people of this religion, and like it's fairly high, but nothing is being done to stop that. It's like, oh, like, well, like the gays can't marry, but I'm allowed to get drunk and beat my wife. So somehow that's supposed to make sense. And I think the crazy part is, like I'm going all the way back a couple hundred years ago with residential schools. It's like these people were saying like, oh yeah, like what we believe in is correct. All this crazy bullshit about, like work, like giving thanks to the earth and all this stuff is wrong, and you're all heathens. And it's just like, whoa, like that makes zero sense whatsoever.
Well, and I think that like right now, what I'm seeing is just that science is coming out and information is spreading. I've been really digging into the deconversion community, and it seems like people that the more you study the Bible, the soon like you just start to jump off. You're just like, I can't do this. You're just like, wow, this is terrible. It's all, it's all manufactured. There was a guy, because I've been speaking about this on my socials lately, and there was a guy that commented, and he's like, it's not Jesus that's the problem, it's people that's the problem. They're the ones, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, so you don't believe I'm like, so you don't trust the people that wrote the book about the person that you believe.
Yeah, that's
I'm
actually
like, I'm like, that's the sad thing is like when, previous generations, when previous tribes, would come in and conquer other tribes, they would just burn everything. All of
yeah.
the knowledge that previous generations had was just completely eradicated. And I look at, how indigenous culture, there's so much wisdom, I think, in terms of the healing properties of plants.
Mhm.
And, I've just been really enjoying learning about that, especially being in the Okanagan, being in British Columbia. I'm surrounded by a lot of really sacred lands here. So I'm, really hoping to be able to learn more about that in the, just as I continue to enjoy the beauty and the mountains here in British Columbia. It's one of Canada's kind of last undeveloped areas, which is interesting. Unfortunately, we have 30% of missing people in Canada are in British Columbia alone. So we have a
Wow.
disproportionate number of missing people, and that's men and women. But we have the missing and murdered Indigenous women, the Highway of Tears. That's somewhere I've driven a lot. It's really powerful to go and drive and see all these signs. You see stories, you meet people whose cousins, aunts, grandmothers, sisters have gone missing. It's real. I was chatting with a guy and I was talking about my interest in this, and he said, "Well, I don't really like to surround myself with violence." And I'm like, "Well, you better move out of British Columbia because it's here. Like the bodies are right up the road here. I live
Wow.
not too far from Salmon River Road, and multiple bodies were found there. And there's a huge inequality here in income. There's a really big number of pipeline workers that come in. They make a lot of money. And going back to the alcohol thing, I mean, we have this culture of like going out and drinking and, looking cool. And you get young kids on Tinder at the age of 18 and seeing stuff online. And I know that I'm seeing kids in the area that are going on sugar baby and sugar daddy websites. And what I'm reading about this farm down the street is that this gentleman would, I say the word gentleman loosely, he would meet women on, I guess, the dark web in terms of like just in sex work. And I used to have a huge judgment, a huge just biased towards anybody that does sex work. However, I've since changed my viewpoints, because when you are in a situation where, you are, let's say, a woman, you've come from a traumatic experience in some sort and you need money to get a safe place to live. Like that is your Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's something that we've talked about a lot because I've been moving a lot. I've done the nomad thing and now I'm trying to find a permanent place to stay. That's proven to be really hard in this market right here for me as somebody with no kids that makes a decent income. But I talk to other women who have children who have lost their jobs due to COVID and stuff like that. And what are their options going to be in terms of making a decent income, knowing that the deck is stacked against them from the day they were born?
Yeah. It's yeah, when you're left with no option, there's not much you can really do about that. But you got to do what you got to do, right? Like I was never raised very religious, and I think like religion always escaped me. Like the idea that like there's a God who's watching you never like just intuitively made sense to me from a young age, because I wasn't really exposed to that. My only exposure to like religion was through like watching The Simpsons when I was younger, and them always making fun of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And then later on, there's a web comic that I encourage everyone here to check out. It's an old YouTube video from like the late 2000s. If you look up Sodom and Gomorrah, like for the Bible story
Yeah.
from Brad Neely Comics, oh my God, so good. This
Okay.
is where I learned of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the two awful towns. And at the time, I sent this to my girlfriend at the time, who was Catholic. And she watched it and she was like, don't send this to my mother.
Yeah, I think that those were like two towns that God basically destroyed. Because I remember like one of them, like they were like, "Don't turn around and look," and like she turned around and looked, she turned into a
She turned
pillar of
into a
salt.
pillar of salt. Yep. And who knows what other spices they might
Does
turn
that
into.
does that mean, sorry, but does that mean she was just dehydrated like a little bit? Like, wasn't it burning? So yeah, those are the
Yeah.
stories that I grew up on. And I think about the origin of like what would be the motivation of somebody to determine homosexuality as a sin to be outlawed. And the reasoning I've come up with is if you have a tribe and you are trying to be the biggest tribe, you need the most workers. And
Yeah.
if you have same-sex couples, they are not producing
Mhm.
children, which to
Yeah.
be like on the opposite side, now we have overpopulated places that we're feeding garbage.
Yeah. So this is when you take this idea and just kind of you run with it too much. Like, yeah, this is like an unintended consequence. I could definitely see, back then, a couple thousand years ago, when we're all living in tribes and like increasing our numbers is going to be good for the tribe. Then okay, yeah, you want to discourage anything that takes away from that. So you want to build up this idea of having like a family units, so to speak, and like in a community, like I know all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like, and if like homosexuals are going to detract from that, then it would be in their best interest, the tribe's best interest, to you know discourage that. But now you fast forward a couple of thousand years later, and this is the unintended consequence of just letting that just autoplay for the past couple of thousand years. But yeah, like, and I think that has to do with a lot of things. Even like in certain religions like Judaism and Islam, where you can't eat pork, that was like a pure sanitary thing, I think, because back then you didn't have refrigerators, right? And pork was one of those meats that was susceptible to developing you where you could get trichinosis. Well,
Mm.
they didn't know it was trichinosis at the time. They just knew you got sick. So there was a reason, like the Jews and the Muslims told their people don't eat pork because like the odds of getting sick eating that are fairly high.
Well, and if you look at like the climate of the origins of where they are, they're not in a cold climate.
Yeah, this is all like very arid, like hot places. Like we're talking about like the Middle East here. So like it's it kind of fits like the purpose of what they have required, and then as well. But I mean, I think one thing my ex told me was the Bible is not supposed to be interpreted literally, and that's where it starts to go wrong. They say instead the Bible is supposed to be like a collection of stories that tell a moral, and you're supposed to follow the moral of the story, not like the literal quotes of it.
Okay, so what is the moral of women shouldn't teach and women are saved having children? That's like, that's the thing I think the problem I have with the Bible is people always have some way to explain the homophobic, racist, sexist bullshit that's in there. They're, oh, no, 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 you're not actually supposed to take the advice. There's just this general idea, and if you wave it around your head, you'll get like the general, fuck off, man. Like there's so
Yeah.
many books that people use to understand the one book. But you know what? Here's the thing. It's not just one book. There's a whole bunch of other, stories that they didn't include that they chose not to include. Like, and this goes back to that comment that I said to that dude, like, oh, you believe the dude that the people that you don't believe in told you about. Like, it's all, yeah. It's a construct. I think my mind was really opened when you told me about the mushrooms and the theory behind
Oh, right.
the mushrooms as
The
being
burning
part
bush
of.
and the Ten Commandments, and yeah, and it's all just a bit elaborate mushroom trip.
Yeah, but it makes sense. And if you know what, I think the thing that shocked me the most was looking up the art that actually exists that shows that. And it makes a lot of sense. If you were in the tree of life and you ate, mushroom and had snakes would talk to you.
Have you seen what an angel looks like according to the Bible?
No, I have not.
It
Is
is
it look?
horrific. It is
Is it alien?
really
Because like, isn't the
it.
CIA releasing a whole bunch of alien information this month?
So if you actually look up like a biblical angel, it doesn't even have a human form. It's a series of like rings, and all the rings have eyes on them. So this thing probably has like a few dozen eyes and faces and multiple arms. Like if you look up like cherub or like biblical angel in Google Photos, like or Google Images, like you'll see right away that if you saw this thing in real life, this would be extremely horrific.
Wow.
So yeah, like so there's that whole thing, and like the idea that they excluded a whole bunch of stories that didn't fit the narrative is like mind blowing. And like because like what's not isn't that the whole controversy behind the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they're finding more and more parts of the Bible that they never found in the first place.
I don't know. I don't watch a lot of the news. So I don't really keep up with it.
Like from what I understand, it's that because like I mean all the Abrahamic religions, so like Christianity slash Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam, like it all kind of follow like they're all set in the same universe if you want to think about it like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
But it's that the Jews only believe in the Old Testament, so they
Hmm.
say that Jesus existed. They recognize he existed, but he was not the savior that Christianity claims he is. So
Oh,
they're
all
like
this
that's
stuff makes my head hurt, really.
yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, and people get so caught up in the semantics of religion, and it's like, you guys are arguing just like the dumbest little things because none of this like makes it even matters if like these bigger underlying questions aren't answered first. Like, why does Judaism only respect the Old Testament? Christianity has the New Testament. The King James Version has its own Bible. Catholics have their own little sect. Then you have the snake handlers. You ever see that stuff like in the South, like the guys who handle the rattlesnakes?
No.
Like I was telling my ex before, like I would gladly go to church every Sunday if my church was held in a tent with a bunch of yelling and singing, and you have like the faith healers like heal the blind man, and then the person like picks up the rattlesnake and they swing it around and doesn't bite them because God is protecting them. Like I would gladly go to church every week if that's what I got to see.
Yeah, no, some amazing metaphysical stuff that they can't really recreate. I actually was in a farmer's market, had this guy come up to me and my friend, and he starts talking to us. He's got a doTERRA hat on. I think he's about to sell us some essential oils for back pain. And then he goes up to her back and he says, in the name of Jesus, we're gonna, heal your back and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, oh. And he's like, do you feel better? And she's like, nope. And then he's like, oh, let me try again. It usually works, blah blah blah. And I was like, wait a second. I'm like, did you do any like you didn't do any biomechanical analysis? Like, I'm like, I'm educated in kinesiology, and you didn't do any kind of quantitative analysis, even qualitative analysis of her body. So how are you gonna, you're just like asking her. And from what I saw, if you basically harass somebody enough, I think that they will tell you that they're like, thank you for healing me. Please go away. Because it was super uncomfortable. He kept on wanting to try it again and again. And we're like, no, not doing it. One of the things I've been thinking of lately is the image. There's a gentleman online. He put together a graph of all the contradictions in the Bible. I'm just thinking about like my own beliefs in terms of like Judaism believing in the Old Testament and the New Testament, being Christianity, and just the whole idea and the concept of a God who loves everybody, but yet sends his son for a sacrifice. That's narcissistic for the most part and traumatizing. Like, I really don't think that narrative is one that I follow. I'm really much more into the indigenous spiritual, learning about that kind of stuff, the moon cycles, this alien
Yeah.
stuff that's going to come out soon, energy, but this whole idea of one God, the feminine, masculine, woman, male versus like roles. Like, that's the interesting thing. If the Bible was so good, why were they so binary? Because that's not accurate.
Yeah. There's like a quote from The Simpsons as well, where like something happens to Flanders and he's kind of like questioning like why is he so religious? And he's like, God, like why did this happen to me? Like he's like, come on, like I follow the Bible, I follow all the stuff you tell me to do, and I even follow the stuff that contradicts the other stuff.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like
Like,
even like Reverend Lovejoy as well, like he's like consulting Marge because I think Marge leaves Homer or something, and Homer's like, aha, like Reverend Lovejoy's here. He'll have to like promote the sanctity of marriage or his God will punish him. And they're like back in the house, Reverend Lovejoy's like, yeah, you should get a divorce.
well, I mean, speaking of divorce, these are the themes that are baked into our laws right now. And it's really archaic that we are still continuing to run our country, and people are getting sick, things are not going better, our country is going into debt because we still rely on these laws. Like, up until 1974, women could be denied credit for a house. So if you think about the systematic effect that would have on women that were in an abusive home, probably with children, because abortions were also, I've also been a contentious issue. That has some significant effects on subsequent populations and their health, trauma, and as well as just physical needs, being able to afford things. I know for myself, I've spent a lot of money trying to heal my body.
Yeah. I remember reading a story, and I forget the exact timeline, but this is like we're talking like well over 100 years ago. And I think it was that like they brought this African man over to the US, and he was from like a certain tribe, but they're all like much shorter. And I think they had him live in a zoo exhibit so that the other people could like watch, like, oh, like look at this weird man with this dark skin, and look at and like put him in like a habitat just like where he lives in Africa. And it's like this is like really weird and gross.
Wow. That's crazy. That's so sad.
Or it's like it's also like like old circus sideshows as well, and they'd have like like the Indian chief and like the like bearded lady and like the crab boy and all that kind of stuff, and it's just these people like with these anomalies, and it's like saying like, oh, come check out the freaks, that'll be $5.
Wow. Like, it's funny because like we keep on saying that this, has been abolished into history, but the residential schools were operating until 1996.
What?
President, yeah,
Holy shit.
yeah, man, super recently. Um, and like President Trump, just, said Pocahontas. We had the George Floyd situation. We've had this whole uprising of Black Lives Matter, which has been awesome to see because it's been a long time coming with this residential school thing. I'm like, good. I'm glad everybody is now finding this out. The bodies were already there. This has not changed the situation other than it is time to hold people accountable and start looking at solutions. Like this has, created some serious issues for our society, and it's costing us a lot of money, frankly.
Yeah, like this is definitely Canada's like black eye that no one really talks about. And yeah, like I didn't know it was up until 96. Like 96, I was like in grade 5 or 6, maybe. Like I'm talking young, I'm like I was like 11, 10, 11 years old, like watching like wrestling on the weekends.
Mm-hmm,
Can
mm-hmm.
imagine like the residential schools are still happening there. Cause like what's the deal? Like are they were they just thinking that like, oh, there's like native kids out there who aren't educated in the way of God yet, so we need to get at them before they fall back to the old religion?
Like it was like they were still there because again, no one did anything. Like it was like this is the way it's always been. And I think that that's kind of the attitude with religion too, is people think that this is the way it's always been and it's not harmful. And like there's just more and more evidence coming out that religion is harmful. It's contrary to science. Meanwhile, Alberta is starting to like throw out certain aspects of the curriculum and integrate like religious based
Oh wow.
curriculum into their science. Yeah, into their science. It's at the end of the day, I'm science based. I'm research based, and I want to create a better world in an efficient way. And like frankly, like this is just costing us lots of money in terms of the traumas that continue. They will just continue to create more and more problems. Like I grew up in a very conservative, right wing household, and I get a lot of conservatives that call me left wing, but I'm not necessarily. It's just cheaper if everyone's not sick, and I'm not saying that I don't care about people, but like I do care about people and I want people to live, and I don't want to give anybody an unfair advantage, but we also need to rectify for the serious harms that we've caused generations of people that are costing us tons of money, guys. Like we need to come to face with this and actually create solutions.
Yeah, definitely. I think like this is basically what happens when you just let like the status quo run for decades or centuries at a time, and just kind of check back in, and you're kind of like, oh crap, didn't mean for that to happen. But here we are today. So yeah, it's really interesting, especially when you tie in like the financial side of things, because you would think that if you could show that healthier population means more cost savings, the capitalistic society would be all over this. Like there's a reason that insurance, like especially in the US where it's all private insurance, there's a reason insurance companies push like fitness and wellness, because their actuaries figured out that if my client is fitter, they're gonna be less costly to me. Yet for some reason, that doesn't seem to stick at like at an overall public level. And it's like I don't know how to explain this even further, because like for example, like through like my startup, for a while we were in the ergonomics and workplace safety realm, and it all became like a matter of how can you equate better movements to more cost savings. And gets to a point where there are insurance companies in the US that develop their own biomechanical assessments that relates movement or joint angles or joint repetitions into a dollar cost based on the time cost of a worker. So like they understand this at a high level, but when you try to sell like someone who's not in this world on that idea, it just makes zero sense to them. And they're saying this is a big reason why preventative health measures are not looked at so much, is that whoever's at the people at the top who are the decision makers who don't even have health backgrounds, they don't understand the relationship between prevention and cost savings. And instead, it's more so, okay, well, but if we're not experiencing the problem, I'm not going to put any energy or money to it. So I'm only going to react when things happen. But like any reactive scenario or solution is never going to be as truly as effective. You're just running around putting out fires instead of trying to stamp out the root cause.
Which
So
keeps pharmaceutical companies in
yeah,
business.
so then it gets in a very interesting play where now all the guys manufacturing painkillers are all happy because they're all they're all making money. Then all the PT clinics, they're also making money because more people are coming for the treatment. So you would think that like in a way that it's almost in their best interest to not provide good solutions
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because if you want to get even further down the rabbit hole, you can only even think about as then you get the cigarette companies and all the food and like all the food companies like a beef council and all that kind of stuff pushing factory farm grain fed beef to
Why
keep
why is it cheaper for me to get grass-fed beef from Australia than it is for me to get grass-fed beef from Canada?
yeah like that's
That's a
like,
legislation issue.
yeah like that makes zero sense whatsoever.
Zero
Like
cents. But the Canadian legislation has forced Canadian farmers into that situation. All right, Ben. Well, I think that's probably enough for today. I know that you probably have another meeting to get to. Thanks again for the great chat. And want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, you can come find me on Instagram at Fortius Labs, FORTIUS LABS. Come to us, if you're looking for solutions for any kind of low back or any kind of joint pain. If you're active and concerned about getting hurt, we can definitely help you out. Conversely, if you're also a personal trainer or a strength conditioning coach and you want a more efficient and effective solution for your clients, you can give us a shout as well. Our AI tech has been proven to help reduce injury risk and improve wellness. If you want to come see me personally and come look at pictures of my cats, you can check me on Instagram as well. That's at BCYLEE. It's a private channel, so you might have to wait a few days for me to approve you.
Yeah, and again, my name's Rocky's Adventure, and my Instagram is Rocky's Adventure, and this is the Unsubscribe Tribe. And if you don't like what we have to say, feel free to hit that unsubscribe button. We're here to find the truth and navigate the advice out of the advertising. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.